Hello, readers by eyes and ears. This is Mari Chen, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today, we are continuing the beautiful Thousand Autumns, Volume 2, also known as Qianqiu by Meng Xi Shi. And today, we will be reading chapters 35 through 37. Enjoy! Chapter 35, Contention. One truly couldn't fault Bairong for overreacting. The demonic sex fear of Yan Wushi ran incredibly deep. Before he'd entered secluded cultivation, Yan Wushi had taken on all three demonic sects by himself. By his hand, Fa Jing's sect had been half annihilated, and He Huan's sect suffered devastating losses too. Just a little more, and the unification he sought would have been complete. If it hadn't been for his defeat by Cui Youwang, which forced him to recuperate in seclusion, who knew how the three sects would look? Even though his efforts had fallen short, the fear of Yan Wushi's name was etched deeply in the bones of all demonic cultivators. Since she was fairly young, Baizhong hadn't been strong enough to face him in combat back then. But not long ago, her master had ordered her to assassinate Yan Wushi's eldest disciple, Bian Yanmei, and in a stroke of misfortune, she encountered Yan Wushi himself. It'd taken everything she had to escape with her life, an experience which granted her a deeper appreciation for the title Demon Lord. If Shen Qiao hadn't been alone today, she never would have risked showing herself. But when she saw Shen Qiao use the spring water finger technique, the terror from her recent brush with death reared its head once again. Baizhong dared not meet the approaching finger directly. Instead, she retreated backward with a flash. She was unwilling to let the prey she'd bagged fly away, though. Like a river loach, she plastered herself to the wall and slid along it, angling to grab Shen Qiao from behind. But Shen Qiao almost seemed to have eyes on the back of his head. His pointer finger suddenly became a palm strike. His strike was soft and fluttering and absent any force. Yet, the internal energy contained within it was so relentless and intense that Baizhong dared not take it lightly. By now, she realized that she'd massively underestimated him. When she'd witnessed Shen Qiao coughing up blood inside the carriage just a short while before, she thought him almost spent. To think that he still had so much left in him. Baizhong's palms were lovely and tender, pretty and delicate, and the sight of them should have been enough to soften the heart of any man, make them reluctant to attack. But Shen Qiao was an exception. Because he couldn't see, appearance-based charm techniques had no effect on him. Their palms met, the touch whisper silent and featherlight. It was more akin to a maiden's coquettish appeal to her beloved than an exchange of attacks. Bairong felt a heavy blow slam into her chest. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Gritting her teeth, she struck at the carriage with her other hand. The compartment immediately exploded, the walls splintered, and the horse spooked. It galloped forward madly as Shen Qiao leapt into the air, then landed on its back, giving the reins a harsh yank. The crazed horse snorted, but was forced to slow. From behind him came a low sigh. Shenlong is so gentle and sentimental, unwilling to harm even a horse. I'm a little jealous of sect leader Yan. Reluctant to give up, and seeing that Shen Qiao was distracted dealing with the horse, Baizhong launched herself at him. Her words overflowed with affection, but they didn't blunt the brutality of her attacks in the slightest. She struck at Shen Qiao's back. Even if she crippled him, she thought, it'd be no matter. After all, as long as he drew breath and could speak, he could still recite the volume of diluted thought for her. Shen Qiao heaved a sigh too, but he didn't turn around. Instead, he slid down so that he was against the horse's side. He held the reins with one hand and pressed the horse down with the other, forcing it to kneel on the ground so that it wouldn't end up hurt in the crossfire. Once it was down, he pushed off the ground with the tap of his foot and sent himself flying straight at Baizhong. Baizhong had already suffered beneath his hands, so she dared not face him head-on again. She immediately withdrew her palm and vanished into the woods, leaving behind only a string of giggles. Shenlong is willing to protect even a horse, yet he's so cruel to me. I'll come back to play with you another day. Once he'd made sure she was truly gone, Shen Qiao found he lacked the strength to stay upright. Supporting himself with the horse, he doubled over. His legs gave out, and he dropped to his knees on the ground. Kneeling there, the horse had finally calmed down. It neighed twice and tilted its head at Shen Qiao, looking at him with bright, confused eyes. Shen Qiao patted it gently. I'm sorry for dragging you into this. His words trailed off as blood surged up his throat. He couldn't suppress it. Instinctually, he slapped a hand over his mouth, but the blood trickled out between his fingers. Shen Qiao gave up holding it in. His hand went slack, and the blood spilled out. When it was done, he raised his sleeve to wipe at the bloodstains around his mouth. Releasing another breath, a spate of dizziness came over him. His ears rang, and he staggered, lightheaded. All he wanted was to collapse then and there and close his eyes, to not worry about anything ever again. Such a state wasn't foreign to him. Feebleness had overcome him often ever since he'd been injured. His martial arts were recovering, but even so, his situation didn't improve. Every time he fought, he disturbed his injured meridians time and again, damaging them faster than they could heal. He'd also encountered a bottleneck while cultivating the Zhuyang strategy's true qi and hadn't made any progress in a while. By itself, his original internal cultivation from Xuandu Mountain was unable to repair his damaged foundations. Though he could claim he was used to the feeling, it was still agonizing. He was forced to lean against the horse for a brief rest, thinking that he'd get up again after the excruciating dizziness passed. With his current state, it was impossible for him to ride the horse back to the city. But just then, he heard someone speak from a short distance away. Sect Leader Shun, have you ever heard of the saying, the mantis stalks the cicada, unaware that the oriole stalks it in turn? The voice was neither loud nor quiet, nor was there any swagger to it. It was simply a polite inquiry. It almost sounded as if the speaker was asking for directions instead of issuing a provocation. Shen Qiao didn't open his eyes. Hoarsely, he said, I'm afraid this gentleman's voice is a little unfamiliar to me. I don't think we've met. Yes, this is our first meeting, said the newcomer, unfailingly courteous. I didn't expect Byron to be a step ahead of me, but it's fortunate that she was. Otherwise, I would never have had this wonderful chance. Are you all right? Shen Qiao shook his head. Forgive my rudeness. I can't stand. It's fine, the man said considerately. Despite his words, he didn't move to help Shen Qiao, nor did he leave. Shen Qiao sighed. I still don't know this gentleman's esteemed name. The man laughed. Though we've only just met, I feel as if we're old friends already. I was so lost in my awe that I almost forgot to introduce myself. My name is Guang, and I come from the west of the Yellow River. At the moment, I'm a drifting roamer with no set residence. Guang was a rare last name. A number of people bearing it in the Jianghu could be counted on one hand. What merit does this humble shun have for someone as esteemed as the Fajing sect leader to pay me a personal visit? This humble Guang has admired sect leader Shun for a long time, said Guang Ling San. Unfortunately, we never had the opportunity to meet before today. When word arrived that sect leader Shun had fallen off the cliff, this Guang was full of lament. I never imagined that I'd get the chance to see you defeat 2 people in a row today. What a wonderful fortune. Shen Qiao forced a smile. Enough with the flowery words, sect leader Guang. If you have something to say, say it, for I fear I won't last much longer before I pass out. Then I won't be able to hear anything you wanted to say. Guang Ling San didn't need to experience it himself to know that Shen Qiao must be in excruciating agony. Seeing that Shen Qiao could still manage to chat and laugh, his respect for him grew. Sect leader Yan took something from Frau Jing's sect, he told Shen Qiao. Even now, he has yet to return it, so I have no choice but to invite sect leader Shun for a stay at Fa Jing's sect. Then I fear you've miscalculated, said Shen Qiao. All I do for sect leader Yan is waste his food. A pair of his chopsticks are probably more valuable than I am. Even speaking one sentence exhausted a great deal of his strength. After he forced the words out, his eyes closed, his brows furrowing. His complexion was ghastly white, and he looked as if he might pass away at any moment. Guang Ling San was also afraid that Shen Qiao might suddenly die. He reached out, wanting to check his pulse and pass him some tea. He hadn't yet touched Shun Chao's wrist when he jerked and then retreated dozens of meters. A shallow ditch had appeared in the ground where Guang Lingsan had been standing just a moment before. Outsiders all say that sect leader Yan brought the injured sect leader Shun back in order to humiliate him and make him a plaything. It looks like they might be wrong, Guang Lingsan said, all smiles. It's been so long, and sect leader Yan's splendor has only grown. Yan Wushi glanced at Shun Qiao, who seemed to have either fainted or fallen asleep. His arms hung limply, a stretch of blood stained the end of his sleeve, and his eyes were closed. He was completely unconscious. Yan Wushi swiveled his gaze to Guang Lingsan. In my year of absence, He Huan sect crushed Fajing sect so badly that you couldn't even remain in the Central Plains and were forced to retreat to Tu Yuhun. What an incompetent sect leader you are. Naturally, I'm not as capable as sect leader Yan, said Guang Lingsan. You've even got the sect leader of Xuandu Mountain to use as a bed warmer and a host for parasitic cultivation. You can even use him to test your martial arts. That's 3 birds with 1 stone. Everyone else is just jealous that they'll never have anything similar. At first, I wanted to borrow him for a couple of days, but I didn't expect that sect leader Yan valued him so much that you'd rush over here at top speed. Guang Lingsan was dressed as a scholar and had been born with his gentle and refined looks, but his words were completely unreserved and archetypal of the demonic sects. I heard that Fajing sect has been greatly successful in Tu Yuhun over the years, so much so that Kualu Kagang trusts you completely. The more remote the location, the freer you are. You truly took to the place like a fish to water. Yan Wushi's tone always carried a hint of ridicule. The ill-tempered would grow enraged just listening to him. But due to Yan Wushi's martial prowess, there was nothing they could do about it. They could never defeat him. So over time, his tone became a hallmark of his. Guang Lingsan smiled slightly. We cannot compare with how deeply the Lord of Zhou values sect leader Yan. Northern Zhou is under your Huanyue sect's influence, while He Huan sect monopolizes the trust of Emperor of Qi. In the south, Chun Dynasty has Lingchuan Academy, while the Buddhist and Taoist sects scowl on the sidelines. Our Fajing sect is alone and weak. All we could do was head far away. Yan Wushi's graceful, slender eyes narrowed just a touch. If that's the case, why not stay in Tu Yuhun and continue your operations there? Why did you come to Zhou Dynasty? Naturally, it was to seek out sect leader Yan. I would like sect leader Yan to return the Xiangchun bone to Fajing sect. Return? Said Yan Wushi with a sneer. Is your name carved upon it? It belonged to my master, said Guang Lingsan coldly. Why wouldn't it be mine? Yan Wushi laughed. 10 years ago, you'd never have dared to say such words to my esteemed self. Where is this bravado coming from? Just how much leopard guts did you eat over the past 10 years? Though strength was everything in the Jianghu, normally they also maintained a thin veneer they called morals and ethics. But the demonic sects took this principle to its most extreme. As long as you were strong, you could have anything you wanted. And if you were weak, even if you died, you only had yourself to blame. 10 years ago, before Yan Wushi's secluded cultivation, he'd crushed the other 2 sects so utterly that they didn't even dare to breathe too loudly. But a person could forget many things in 10 years, even fear. Of course, Yan Wushi's martial prowess had soared during his 10 years of seclusion, but others had made progress too. Furthermore, Guang Lingsan was also one of the top 10 martial artists in the world. Even if there was a gap between them, it certainly wasn't an uncrossable chasm. Shun Qiao groaned quietly as he struggled to lift his heavy lids and open his eyes. A blurred mass of shadow and light crept into his vision. It wasn't absolute darkness, but what he could see was limited. It wasn't too different from being completely blind, so he simply closed his eyes again. You're awake, Shen Langjun. The medicine is ready and is still hot. This lowly one will help you drink. It was Ruru's voice. Shun Qiao recognized it, the voice of the maid from the junior preceptor's residence. She'd taken care of everything for him during his time in the junior preceptor's residence. This is the junior preceptor's residence? Shun Qiao only recalled meeting Guang Ling San, then being unable to hold on and passing out. Ruru covered her mouth and giggled. Of course your esteemed self is in the junior preceptor's residence. How could Ruru be here otherwise? The master brought you back. She brought the medicine to him and helped him drink, then straightened the bedding beneath him. The doctor was here, and you said you're suffering from qi and blood deficiency. You must take some blood-enriching medicine. Shun Qiao nodded. Where is sect leader Yan? The master is in the study with Da Langjun. The one she called Da Langjun was none other than Pian Yan Mei. Perhaps there were calming agents in the bowl of medicine, for after a few sentences, Shun Qiao involuntarily dozed off again. When he woke once more, the room was already dark, and there was a blurred silhouette at his side. Sect leader Yan? He groped his way into a sitting position. Yan Wushi put down the book he held, but didn't move to help him, merely grunting in reply. Guang Ling-san left? Asked Shun Qiao. He did, said Yan Wushi, after we fought. He's skilled, but he shouldn't have been a match for you. That was his only comment on the incident. He didn't seem surprised at Yan Wushi's timely appearance, nor did he ask about it. I heard that you fought with Duen Wenyang in the Su residence, said Yan Wushi. That man was incredibly skilled. Given enough time, he might become as strong as Hulugu was. How was he compared to Kunye? Quite a bit stronger than Kunye. In that case, you only won through pure luck. Shun Qiao didn't play himself up. True, he had just suffered some minor injuries fighting Li Qingyu. I took advantage of that. I checked your pulse just now, said Yan Wushi. When you fell from the cliff that day, Joyful Reunion's poison had already penetrated deep into your marrow and destroyed your foundations. I used to think that the Juyang strategy could repair your meridians, but examining you now, I see that having only 2 scrolls of 5 yields minimal results. The fact that you're constantly fighting and getting injured is even more problematic. That will only worsen the damage to your Taoist core. If you go on like this and your Taoist core is completely destroyed, even the gods won't be able to save you. No matter how powerful the Juyang strategy is, it cannot do what even the gods cannot. The Taoist core wasn't any simple core. It held the foundations of Shun Qiao's martial arts, and it lay at the base of the internal cultivation he had built up from childhood. If his Taoist core were destroyed, then all of his moves and techniques would be rendered useless, for he could never again strike for that martial zenith. This was Shun Qiao's current situation. Due to his injury and poisoning, his Taoist core was on the verge of destruction. At this point, gradual restoration via the Juyang strategy's true qi should have been the best way to heal it. But the problem lay in Shun Qiao only knowing 2 of the Juyang strategy scrolls instead of all 5. Making matters worse, it was impossible for him to stay uninvolved in matters within the Jianghu. Every time he fought, his qi was inevitably affected, which damaged his Taoist core. Over time, the problem became a vicious cycle. If a day came where the Juyang strategy's true qi could no longer repair the damage, then that would mean his foundations had collapsed completely, and he'd be beyond all saving. Incidentally, Yan Wushi had also contributed to the repeated damage to Shun Qiao's foundations. If he hadn't forced Shun Qiao to fight him again and again, Shun Qiao wouldn't be adding new injuries on top of his old unhealed ones. But in this moment, Sect Leader Yan's expression was earnest and solemn, as if he'd selectively forgotten his share of responsibility. Shun Qiao didn't know whether to call him shameless or egotistical. Are you saying you have a solution? Yan Wushi was unruffled. Indeed, I do. If you're willing to toss out your Taoist core and allow me to implant a demonic core inside of you, and then you cultivate the Fenglin scriptures, everything will be solved in one stroke. Shun Qiao sighed. I cannot help but admire sect leader Yan's careful and meticulous execution of his plans. Once the demonic core is implanted, I'll inevitably become temperamental and erratic, savage and bloodthirsty. It might be a happy thing to you, but for me, it would be like losing my true self. Even if it definitely advanced my martial arts, what meaning would there be? Yan Wushi took on a mocking expression. What is true self? Humans are evil by nature. Is doing as you desire not true to your true self? Look at Cheng Gong. You showed him so much kindness and even traveled together, sharing with him trials and tribulations. But when a crisis arose, even though there were clearly 100 different ways he could have extricated himself, all he thought to do was draw the disaster to you and drag you down with him. Given his background, no one had ever taught him how to read or behave. Was what he did not true to his true self? Shun Qiao wanted to turn his head away, but he was forcibly yanked back by a hand on his chin, preventing his escape. There was only one reason you were able to faithfully follow your Taoist core and refuse to give up on your so-called principles, said Yan Wushi. It's because you've never been in a situation so hopeless that you could no longer endure. Am I right? A pair of dull, vacant eyes blinked, their long eyelashes trembling. After a long time, Shun Qiao finally spat out the word. Yes. Yan Wushi's voice brimmed with malice. No matter how powerful the Juyang strategy is, it can't create something out of nothing. There is no way you'll recover your martial arts in a couple of years with the state you're in. Your foundation's damaged, fainting and vomiting blood at the drop of a hat. You might even linger in this half-dead state for the rest of your life. Now that everyone has seen you appear at the Su residence with the junior preceptor's invitation, news of our relationship will spread quickly throughout the Jianghu. My venerable self has enemies everywhere. They can't touch me. But you're an easy target. What do you think they'll do to you if they catch you? Will they torture you into writing out the Juyang strategy? Or will they rape and kill you first, and then rape your corpse some more out of spite? When that happens, can you still find such a situation endurable? Finally, Shun Qiao couldn't take it anymore. We can talk about that when it actually happens. Sect leader Yan need not trouble himself before then. Yan Wushi's hand had been slapped aside, but he wasn't angry. Instead, he snorted a laugh, his mood lightening. Come on, I was only scaring you a little. Just that was enough to upset you? Shun Qiao was speechless. There was a saying that grasping a woman's heart was like finding a needle on the ocean floor, but Shun Qiao felt that grasping Yan Wushi's heart was as impossible as finding a needle in a bottomless abyss. At that moment, there came a knock on the door. Enter, said Yan Wushi. The maid Ruru came in with a bowl of medicine. Master, this is the second bowl of soup that was prepared for Shunlangjun today. Put it here, said Yan Wushi. Ruru put the bowl down as asked, then reminded Shun Qiao. Shunlangjun must drink it while hot for utmost effectiveness. Shun Qiao thanked her, then took the bowl and drank it in one gulp. Shun Qiao had one small shortcoming. He liked sweet things and hated bitter things. As a child on the Xuandu mountain, whenever he got sick, he would hide and refuse to take his medicine. When he heard that internal cultivation could make one impervious to the heat and cold, he put his all into his training. Everyone else thought he was extra hardworking, while in truth, he was just trying to escape the bitter medicine. But here at Yan Wushi's residence, no matter how many bowls of medicine were brought to him, he drank them all without objection. His little habits betrayed him, though. Every time, before he raised the bowl, his brows would furrow a little, and when he put the bowl down, the corners of his mouth would twitch. Yan Wushi saw this. When Shun Qiao finished the medicine, he picked up a candied preserve from the table and shoved it into Shun Qiao's mouth. Ah, Qiao, if you dislike bitter things, he said in a honeyed tone, I'll ask them to put some barley sugar in your medicine in the future. Now, smile for me. Don't frown so much. Shun Qiao, lost for words, was utterly exhausted in both body and mind. Chapter 36. Meeting the Emperor. Zhu couldn't resist smiling knowingly at the sight of Yan Wushi and Shen Qiao being so intimate with one another. She'd been with Shen Qiao for many days and admired his character and conduct greatly, so she hoped that the master would treat him well. Of course, she didn't understand how difficult it was for Shen Qiao as he choked on that piece of candied fruit. His stomach roiled, and he longed to spit it out and return it to Yan Wushi. But that would be out of character for Shen Qiao, so in the end he was forced to swallow it. It seemed like today's medicine tasted more bitter than ever. Even the candied fruit was no help. Yan Wushi smiled as he watched, supporting his chin on one hand. Seeing that Shen Qiao was about to lose his temper, he slowly said, "I went to the palace to meet the Emperor of Zhou today. He asked me to tell you that he wants to meet with you." Shen Qiao jolted, his attention successfully diverted. "Meet with me?" "Tomorrow morning. I'll take you to the palace. He'll meet with you after morning court, at around 7. "I'm nothing more than a countryside commoner now. Does sect leader Yan know why the emperor wishes to meet with me?" "Take a guess." With Yan Wushi's malicious personality, there was no way he'd answer so easily, so Shen Qiao paused to ponder the issue. "I attended the birthday celebration at the Su residence just today. The emperor can't possibly know that I fought with Duen Wenyang already, so it can't be about that. Then it must be because of Xuandu Mountain? Because I was invited by the Gok Turks for a lecture? Northern Zhou and the Khaganate are allied for a moment, but deep down they're wary of each other and have never trusted one another. So the emperor wishes for me to do something?" "How clever of you!" Yan Wushi clapped his hands. "See? I didn't say a word, and you still guessed most of it yourself." Shen Qiao frowned. "Then what does the emperor want of me?" "You'll know when you go tomorrow. There's something else I want you to do." Shen Qiao shook his head. "I can't help with anything cruel or immoral." "What are you thinking?" Yan Wushi laughed softly. His fingers gently brushed over the side of Shen Qiao's face before landing on Shen Qiao's lips. He couldn't avoid it in time. Yan Wushi even rubbed at his mouth so that his lips blushed, blood-tinted. Finally, Yan Wushi said, "Xuandu Mountain prospered during the Qin Han dynasties. I heard that the first sect leader of Xuandu Mountain was a wandering Taoist priest who specialized at telling someone's fortune by the sound of their voice. Even Xu Fu was once his disciple." Shen Qiao laughed. "People love to tell tall tales. I don't know whether the founder of Xuandu Mountain had anything to do with the Marquis of Ci, but fortune-telling through facial features is essential skill for Taoists. Doing it by the sound of a voice does seem even more incredible, but in truth, it's nothing special. Since the body produces the voice, you can hear whether someone's in good health or bad. For example, if there's excessive fire in someone's lungs, their voice will be hoarse and quiet, akin to a hand bellows. As long as you have some knowledge of martial arts and medicine, it's not hard to identify such issues." As soon as Shen Qiao said all this, Yan Wushi knew that he must have studied it extensively at some point. "I want you to listen to Yu Wenyong's voice," he said. Shen Qiao frowned. "The Zhou Palace does not lack for master physicians. The 4 methods of diagnosis, sight, hearing, questioning, and post-checking, are fundamental to the medical discipline. If the Emperor of Zhou truly is ill, how could none of those doctors have detected it? My skills are only mediocre. I fear I won't be able to help." In his early years, Yu Wenyong saw his own brother die by poisoning when their cousin bribed his physician. From then on, he refused to consult any doctors and isn't willing to let them treat him for illness. However, since he'd been managing state affairs day and night for many years, disease took root in him long ago. My own judgment tells me that it's likely the damage is already done, but I still need you to give him a listen." Shen Qiao thought for a while, then nodded slightly. "Very well." A smile crept on Yan Wushi's face. "My Chao is the best." Shen Qiao's face was blank. "I have a present for you," said Yan Wushi. He clapped his hands, calling in a maid from outside. "Does master need something?" "Bring me the sword case that I keep in the study," he told her. The maid assented, then quickly returned with the sword case and presented it to him with both hands. Yan Wushi took it and caressed it a bit before placing it in Shen Qiao's arms with a small smile. Ah, so he's getting his sword back. Yay! At first, Shen Qiao was a little confused. He groped around and unlatched the lock on top of the sword case. When his fingers brushed the sword inside, joy bubbled up inside him. Shanhe Tongbei? Do you like it? Yan Wushi smiled brightly. Thank you, Sect Leader Yan, for taking such good care of it. When Shen Qiao had awakened after his fall from the cliff, Shanhe Tongbei hadn't been with him. At that time, his memories were fragmented, leaving him unable to remember the sword at all. Later, when he did recall it, he'd asked Yan Wushi about it, but he received no answer, and so he never asked again. After all, the sword might not even be with Yan Wushi. It could have gone missing with his fall. And, even if it were with Yan Wushi, Shen Qiao would have been far too ashamed to wield it, given how weak he was back then. But how could he be unhappy after recovering what he'd lost? His Shitsuan had given him the sword as a gift when Shen Qiao was 7, and it hadn't left his side for a moment since. The sword made the man. To Shen Qiao, it had long ago ceased to be a mere sword. He held Shanhe Tongbei in both hands and stroked the surface with his palms again and again. His sheer happiness was so palpable that a shining radiance seemed to suffuse his face, transforming him into a figure carved from pure white jade. Everyone loved beautiful people, and Yan Wushi was no exception. Though he wasn't the type to soften before a pretty face, that didn't stop him from delighting in the sight of one, and he immediately began to tease. Come, another smile. Shen Qiao did not reply. He withdrew his smile, even pressing his lips together tightly. When Yan Wushi saw this, he could only regretfully stop himself and say, What's that severe expression for, Ah Chao? I've returned your sword to its rightful owner, untouched. How will you thank me for it? By now, Shen Qiao had learned to be sly as well. Didn't Sect Leader Yan return Shanhe Tongbei to me because I agreed to enter the palace with him and meet the Emperor of Zhou? Yan Wushi laughed. All right, he said, letting it go. Whatever you say. Shen Qiao paid no heed to his lunacy. Instead, he said, As you said, it will be terribly difficult to restore my damaged foundations to their original condition, even with the Zhuyang strategy volumes. However, I will not forsake Taoism to pursue the demonic path. You wish to raise me up as an opponent, but I fear you'll need to wait another 8 or 10 years, and even then, you may not see it happen. If Sect Leader Yan will permit me, I'd like to leave Zhou after my meeting with the Emperor. Yan Wushi was unconcerned. And where could you go after leaving Zhou? Without my protection, and in your condition, a series of fights will carve you into pieces. There may be countless ways to cultivate, Shen Qiao said. But ultimately, they can be reduced down to 2. To detach from the world or to immerse yourself in it. Since I've chosen the latter, I must experience the many trials and tribulations that arise from worldly desires in order to pursue my path. I may lack strength now, but I can still come up with methods to protect myself. If I keep relying on Sect Leader Yan for protection, how is it that any different from remaining on Xuandu Mountain? How very like Shen Qiao to say such a thing. Even when he'd fallen into the mire, when he was smeared with dust and grime and was at anyone's mercy, still he struggled back to his feet and walked onward, step by step. His comrades' betrayal, his kindness being repaid with enmity. It was as if he'd taken none of it to heart. It truly made someone long to crush him beneath their heel one more time, just to see how much more he could take before he collapsed completely. Wouldn't that face look even better stained in tears and begging miserably? Yan Wushi laughed. Of course, my venerable self won't stop you if you wish to leave. But I do advise you to delay a little. Recently, Zhou and Chun have decided to form an alliance. So, Linchuan Academy escorted Chun's envoy there. And now, the Emperor of Zhou also wishes to reply to the alliance treaty. So, he'll be sending his own envoy to Chun in return. He's afraid Qi will attempt to obstruct these plans. So he's asked Huan Yue's sect to be escorts on the journey. Originally, this task was assigned to Bian Yanmei, but I intend to go myself because I want to meet Ruyan Kehui, the leader of the Confucian sect, one of the top 3 martial artists in the world, is going to fight my venerable self. Don't you want to see it with your own eyes? No matter how detached Shen Qiao was, he couldn't resist such a temptation. His expression flickered. Has sect leader Yan already sent the challenge letter to Academy Master Ru Yan? Why would I need to send a challenge letter? Yan Wushi said with a mocking smile. Ah, Chao, just because you're not the aggressive type, do you think everyone else is the same? If Ruyan Kuhei knows I'll be going south of the Yangtze, will he not exhaust every means in order to meet me? If he can defeat me, he'll raise his reputation by a fair amount, and if I lose, it'll damage Huan Yue's sect's reputation, striking a blow to our influence in northern Zhou. If Huan Yue's sect were gone, it would mean opportunity for many, both those looking to seize wealth and those who want me out of the way so they can gain Yuan Yong's trust. Such an excellent deal with manifold returns. Who knows how many would jump at the chance? Shen Qiao thought about it and agreed. Although he didn't approve of Yan Wushi's ways and actions, he greatly admired his martial arts achievements. Excited, he quickly replied, "A duel between the 2 of the greatest in the world. How incredible that would be. Anyone in the Jianghu would yearn for a glimpse. If the news spreads, then even if the duel takes place in the deep mountains or remote forests, it will still be packed to the seams with people jostling for a view." And yet, Yan Wushi just had to say, "Ah," just like when you lost to Kunye on Banbu Peak. The very moment you disgraced yourself, the entire world knew. This man was really exceptionally scathing. Shen Qiao immediately shut his mouth and stopped talking. Yan Wushi burst out laughing. But it's not a bad idea at all. Confucians love to lecture people with their lengthy speeches, and Ruyan Kehui's mouthiness has always annoyed me terribly. If I defeat him in front of everyone and then force him in public to swear to shut up, that'd probably be the fate worse than death for him. Early the next morning, Shen Qiao entered the palace with Yan Wushi. The emperor of Zhou had taken Shen Qiao's sight into consideration. He even sent them a carriage. This allowed them to enter the palace and drive all the way to Tian'an Hall without interruptions, foregoing the journey from the palace gates to the main hall. After the Han dynasty fell, there had come the chaos of the 3 Kingdoms period, and it hadn't taken long after the Jin dynasty managed to unify the land for the flames of war to spark again. The Jin were forced to move their capital and restrict their reign to the southeast. Then it was another 100+ years of chaos with the 16 Kingdoms period, all without a unified ruling dynasty. Rulers lacked the manpower and wealth to build large-scale palaces because none of them knew when their country might be overthrown. Any king, no matter how negligible his accomplishments, invested his resources to war first and foremost in order to seize more land and wealth. The various rulers of northern Zhou had done exactly this, so the palace of northern Zhou wasn't particularly large. Its scale was nowhere near the likes of Weiyang Palace or Changle Palace during the Han Dynasty. As the current emperor of Zhou, Yuan Yong had a reputation as a somewhat polarizing figure. He led a humble lifestyle and cared for his people, but at the same time, he was paranoid and harsh on his ministers. When he came into power, he prohibited both Buddhism and Taoism, and later he had distanced himself from Confucianism. Instead, he began to support legalism, which had been in gradual decline since the rule of Han's Emperor Wu. He also relied on Huan Yue's sect to shore up his influence and impose his authority, which led many to denounce him. The opinions of Yuan Yong that Shen Qiao had heard since leaving Xuandu Mountain ranged widely from praise to criticism. It did seem, however, that there was more criticism than praise. And so, Shen Qiao hesitated when Yuan Yong asked him a question after his polite summons. "I heard that you, sir, have spent this time wandering around the common folk and have been subject to much suffering," said the emperor. So you must have also witnessed many of their hardships as well. What are your opinions of me?" Still, Shen Chao said truthfully, "There is veneration, but also reproach." Yuan Yong laughed. "For what do they venerate, and for what do they reproach?" "Those who venerate praise your majesty's humble lifestyle, how you refuse luxury and root out political corruption. Those who reproach criticize your majesty for persecuting Buddhism and Taoism, your harsh treatment of others, and your singular focus on militarism." "You were once the sect leader of Xuandu Mountain," said Yu Renyong. "As I've prohibited Buddhism and Taoism, I'm your enemy as well. Do you not hate me?" His questions came one after another, as if the emperor was trying to force something out of him. Yan Wushi watched coldly from the sidelines. He had no intention of helping Shen Chao. "May this one ask why your majesty prohibits Buddhism and Taoism?" Shen Chao asked. "When the common people blindly practice Buddhism and Taoism, they donate away their savings and stop producing, hoping that they'll be granted whatever they wish in their next life. The Buddhists and Taoist temples gather vast hoards of gold and land while bringing farmers into their fold. Like so, they evade taxes and keep the fields' crops for themselves. If this keeps on, the court will end up empty-handed while the Buddhist and Taoist organizations grow ever stronger. They'll no longer fear the law, and eventually they will become hotbeds of unrest. It was like this 60 years ago when Fa Qing claimed he was a new Buddha and led the people to revolt." Since ancient times, the king held higher authority than any religion, and so, whenever a religion became large enough to threaten the regime, the sovereign would begin ordering persecutions and bans. But this time in particular, Taoism had been collateral damage. To prevent future trouble, Yuan Yong had chosen to ban both schools of thought at once. As for Confucianism, Yuan Yong's original decree had deemed Confucianism the best of the three. But then Ruyan Kehui politely declined the emperor's personal invitation to lecture at Chang'an. Furious, Yuan Yong had then banned Confucianism as well, and with this offended all three schools. Once he was finished, Yuan Yong looked at Shen Chao. "As a practitioner of Taoism, you must think what I did was wrong," he said. "The Tao is like water. Waters benefit all living things without demanding anything in return," replied Shen Chao. "The law of Tao is the law of nature, and practitioners should flow with the current while remaining aloof. To conform oneself to the natural order, to human sensibilities, that is the Tao." Within his words was an implication that the Taoists who reaped benefits at the cost of others were ultimately no more than degenerates. They might be associated with the school of thought, but they could not represent Taoism themselves. Witnessing Shen Chao's prompt answer and clear stance, Yuan Yong's face relaxed. Shen Chao was different from all the Taoists who tried everything to put in a good word for their banned disciple. "I've long heard of Xuandu Mountain, but only today did I have the good fortune to meet you," said Yuan Yong with a delighted smile. "Truly your reputation is well earned. Every passing day, I've had to listen to all these people defending Buddhism and Taoism. I should really let them listen to your words just now. I've never crushed true Taoism, just those who bluff and deceive in the name of immortals. They benefit neither the country nor the people. It's better to root them out and be done with it." His voice brimmed with murderous intent. Now this made it hard for Shen Chao to follow up. Though he wasn't the kind who amassed land and gold, he was still a Taoist, so he couldn't show unabashed support for Yuan Yong's persecution of Taoism. Yuan Yong had never expected to hear any flattering words from him either. As soon as he looked at Shen Chao, who was seated below him and to the left, his tone gentled. "With this first meeting, I already feel as if we're old friends," he said. "You conduct yourself admirably, and I wish to help you reestablish Taoism, to rebuild the Taoist sects. What do you think?" "This humble Taoist doesn't understand what your majesty means," said Shen Chao. "May he ask for further clarification?" Yuan Yong had always been a decisive and straightforward person, and he disliked beating around the bush. I've heard from Junior Preceptor Yan that you were only defeated on Banbu Peak due to a treacherous plot. If that's the case, then Xuandu's Violet Palace does not have the right to dispose you from the position of sect leader. Even if there's no place for you there, other places exist. Since you can no longer stay on Xuandu Mountain, why not reestablish Xuandu Mountain here in Chang'an? With your incredible talents, you will shine brightly wherever you are. At last, astonishment came over Shen Qiao's face. Yuan Yong had been very straightforward. He meant for Shen Qiao to set up a sect in Chang'an, another Xuandu's Violet Palace. Since Qifeng Ge had appointed him sect leader in the first place, it would be all right and proper, and no one could call him a fake. But if this happened, there would be 2 Xuandu Violet Palaces, and the new sect Shen Qiao established would be in opposition with the original Xuandu Mountain, far across the land. Unspoken was the implication that Yuan Yong would use the power of the imperial court to support Shen Qiao. But of course, this help wouldn't come for free. Shen Qiao's newly founded sect would be weak to begin with, which would force him to rely on the court for support. Therefore, what Yuan Yong truly wanted was to use Shen Qiao to cede his own influence and voice among the Taoist sects. Of course, Shen Qiao would benefit from the arrangement too. If he agreed, he would be leader of a sect just like any other, and Yan Wushi would no longer be able to treat him like a plaything. He looked at Yan Wushi, who was kneeling, his posture exuding the languid nonchalance that could only belong to the Huanyue sect leader. His expression was the same, relaxed and careless. The shadow of a smile hung on his lips, as if Yuan Yong's words posed no threat to him at all. Indeed, he seemed to be greatly interested in what Shen Qiao would say in reply. Shen Qiao didn't spend much time thinking it over. "This one is deeply grateful to your majesty," he said directly to Yuan Yong. "But he doesn't have the moral qualifications, so he fears he must disappoint your majesty." Yuan Yong was rather surprised and unhappy with this answer. In his eyes, even though his intent to consolidate power was apparent, his suggestion would still grant Shen Qiao countless benefits with no drawbacks. Meanwhile, Yan Wushi snorted. "I already told your majesty that Ah Chao was an upright gentleman who'd only break but not bend. That he wouldn't accept your majesty's suggestion. But your majesty didn't believe me and wanted to make a bet with me. Now that your majesty has lost, what prize have I won?" At this interruption, Yuan Yong grudgingly said, "I don't understand. You've already fallen so far. Do you have no desire at all to rise again? Are you content to surrender Xuandu Mountain? To let the world misunderstand you, believe you are useless?" Shen Qiao smiled but didn't speak. No matter how unhappy Yuan Yong was with the rejection, it wasn't like he could arrest Shen Qiao for it. "Very well," the emperor said, resigned. "This gentleman can take some time to think it over. If you change your mind, you can come and tell me any time." Then he smiled at Yan Wushi. "No treasures in the world are out of reach for the junior preceptor. There's only one precious item in this palace, the Juyang strategy scroll, and you've already read it. What else could you have in your sights? Why not let me save some face, Allow me to entertain the 2 of you for lunch today." With his forceful personality, it was rare to see him speaking to someone so casually, but Yuan Yong felt a kinship with Yan Wushi, who was a powerful man just like him. The emperor treated Yan Wushi with comparatively more respect than his average court ministers. Before leaving, Yan Wushi and Shen Qiao took their lunch inside the palace. The moment they left the palace gates and entered the junior preceptor's carriage, Yan Wushi asked, "So?" Shen Qiao frowned. "Judging from his voice, I fear fire has been rampant in his liver for a while. Prolonged inflammation invites ruin. He may not have long to live." Chapter 37. Probing. Yan Wushi molded over in silence. "I'm no expert, nor am I a physician," said Shen Qiao, "so I might not have heard very clearly. You should still personally petition His Majesty to call in a physician. That would be best." In truth, Yuan Yong might not be suffering from a deadly disease, but since he'd seized power back from his cousin Yuan Hu, he'd worked around the clock and kept his guard up at all times. Not a day went by that he didn't throw himself into government affairs. He'd even given away the position of empress in order to win over the Gokturks, and to demonstrate his sincerity, he had to treat her with loving affection. To an emperor, especially a powerful emperor like Yuan Yong, this was a humiliation. He started with excellent health, so there had been no signs of deterioration during the early years. But as time went on, even a body of steel couldn't take such wear and tear. The moment the four fundamentals of his health collapsed, his body would crumble too. But before that happened, he might show no clear symptoms at all. Even if an imperial physician were called, at most they'd cite something like fatigue and vitality depletion, tell him to rest and take care of his health for a while. The emperor would never listen. Yan Wushi said nothing on the topic. "Why didn't you agree to Yuan Yong's suggestion?" he asked Shen Qiao instead. "In your current situation, it would only benefit you." "I'm curious about something as well," said Shen Qiao. "If I agreed to his proposal and the new Taoist sect gained the court's full support, that would undoubtedly affect Huan Yue's sect's authority in Zhou. Why does sect leader Yan remain unconcerned?" "Because, regardless of how many sects the court establishes, they cannot affect Huan Yue's sect's standing," said Yan Wushi. "Huan Yue's sect can help Yuan Yong with matters in ways no other sect can. Even if they could, they think such things beneath them. So Yuan Yong can only rely on Huan Yue's sect. He's 32 this year, only just past his prime. Even if he lives for 10 more years, I will be able to accomplish what I want." Shen Qiao canted his head, a little doubtful. "To unify the three demonic sects?" "Do you know how large the Han Dynasty's empire was?" asked Yan Wushi. "If I recall correctly, at its peak, it encompassed Weimen Joseon to the east and Van Xuan to the south, engulfed the Pamir Mountains in the west, and stretched to the Yinshan Mountains in the north." "And how large was the empire after Sima Zhao established the Jin dynasty?" Shen Qiao knit his brows. "By the time the three kingdoms had been unified under the Jin, a portion of their territories had already been lost in the chaos of that period. For example, ever since the Jin dynasty, the eastern peninsula kingdoms of Goguryeo, Baekje, and Xia ceased to be part of the Central Plains. At the same time, the Xianbei and Qiang peoples gradually rose to power west of the Yellow River. The Jin dynasty unified the Central Plains, but its might and wealth paled in comparison to the previous dynasties, and not long after came the War of the Eight Princes." Yan Wushi continued. "From then on, the Central Plains were splintered. First was the uprising of the Five Barbarians, then the 16 Kingdoms period as the states supplanted each other one after another. The turmoil continues today. It's been 259 years. Shen Qiao sighed. "In those 259 years, foreign tribes have invaded time and again. Anyone who amasses a modicum of military power jumps to establish their own nation and declare themselves king, all while they're completely unable to defend it. And so wars arise again and again, breeding chaos, leaving refugees everywhere and corpses scattered throughout the land." Yan Wushi was smiling brightly. "Indeed. It's been over 250 years, and no one's been able to unify the land. The Lintran Academy declares themselves a legitimate representative of Confucianism, but they remain Han-centric. They observe strict separation between the Han and foreign ethnicities and believe that only the Chun dynasty was chosen by heaven. Meanwhile, Buddhism and Taoism hold grudges against Yuan Yong for banning them and driving them out of Zhou. They imagine that a despot like him could never achieve unification." Yan Wushi went on asking, "How many people in the world, whether openly or in secret, seek to trip him up, crave to see misfortune befall him? The moment it happens, misfortune will naturally befell Northern Zhou as well. But I want the exact opposite, to support this unpopular ruler in uniting the land. Wouldn't it be awfully interesting if the demonic discipline can do what the self-proclaimed legitimate three schools can't?" The more others said that something couldn't be done, the more he wanted to try. When everyone claimed that Yuan Yong couldn't be an enlightened ruler because he was ruthless and tyrannical, it only made Yan Wushi support the emperor's ambitions more. He wanted to see them eat crow, all the naysayers and those who would stand in his way. His unpredictable character, the way he did as he pleased, left many grinding their teeth in helplessness. If they wanted to strike down Yuan Yong, first they'd need to get past Yan Wushi, and he towered over them as unconquerable as a mountain, formidable enough to crush their spirits. I heard that the crown prince is still young, said Shen Qiao. Why doesn't sect leader Yan assist the crown prince in the meantime and teach him? If the Lord of Zhou does indeed pass away, won't all your efforts have been for naught? Yan Wushi played with the tassel hanging by the door. And what if the crown prince is completely worthless and unteachable? Should I just grin and bear it? Help a dim-witted idiot onto the throne, then submit myself to him? The implications were really quite shocking. Shen Qiao was momentarily taken aback. You wish to usurp the throne? Yan Wushi sputtered out a laugh. What are you thinking? I have no interest in becoming emperor. Do you think Yuan Yong lives a happy life? Every day he has to meet with people he dislikes, rattle off a bunch of empty formalities, and he was even forced to marry a woman he dislikes to use her as a prop. He spends sleepless nights poring over paperwork from his officials, rises earlier than the roosters, and rests later than the dogs. His only day-to-day satisfaction is the hollow glory of owning boundless land. Don't you feel sorry for him? If I became emperor, I fear that within 3 years I'll have drained the country dry. But given all that, aren't I far more carefree and at ease as I am? Shen Qiao shook his head. Then I understand even less. With your intelligence, you can definitely guess. Try. If you're right, I'll give you a prize. He even drew out his final words, and it suddenly reminded Shen Qiao of Bai Zhong's tone of affected cuteness. The corners of his mouth couldn't help but twitch, and he wondered if this was some distinctive habit of the demonic sex. The man was terribly noxious, and it was often impossible to read his intentions through his words or actions. If you weren't careful, he might end up jerking you around. But Shen Qiao was forced to admit that Yan Wushi, compared to the average martial artist, possessed extraordinarily keen insight into the state of the world. Discussing these things with him benefited Shen Qiao greatly as well. Yuan Yong relied heavily on Huanyue sect, but his successor might not do the same. Even today, the Buddhist discipline was snubbed because of the old regent Yuan Hu's issues, so they jumped at the chance to curry favor with the new emperor. Yan Wushi didn't want to usurp the throne. He also regarded the current crown prince with contempt. The Buddhist discipline would definitely take advantage of the opening to cozy up to the crown prince. Then sect leader Yan wishes to support a different enlightened ruler. Yan Wushi was all smiles. My Chao is so clever. Shen Qiao's face grew dark. Who's your Chao? Yan Wushi pretended he saw nothing and reached over to pinch Shen Qiao's cheek. Not bad. Yu Renxian, the Prince of Qi, disdains both Buddhism and Taoism. He's also brave and skillful in warfare, so he has great support from the military. He'll definitely be able to live up to Yuan Yong's ambitions. He leaned in and whispered in Shen Qiao's ear. This is a secret. I've never told anyone about it before, so you must keep mum about it too. Shen Qiao didn't answer. Could he pretend that he'd heard nothing? It was the 4th of April and a fine sunny day. The carriage wheels rumbled along outside, rolling ever onward, but the compartment inside was well dampened, which limited the jostling. A warm fragrance wafted through the raised curtains, sweet and cloying. From that, it was easy to surmise that the occupants inside were likely women. Yutze had been on the road for almost half a month, but as they approached the border with Chun, she felt none of the fatigue expected from a long and arduous journey. Instead, her spirits rose, for she was originally from Jiangnan and had grown up in Jiankang. Now that she was returning to her hometown, joy bubbled insuppressibly within her. She couldn't resist peeking outside again and again, her eyes shining, unblinking. The maid called to her several times before she turned back. Madame's soul is fit to fly away, teased the maid. It's been 10 years since I was last in Jiangnan. Yutsu couldn't resist glancing out once more. I was still young when I left. I didn't find it particularly pretty back then, but seeing it again today, I've realized that all I can think about is Jiangnan. The north is wonderful, but it isn't my hometown after all. The master was ordered to travel to Chan and deliver a letter to its emperor. Such an important duty, yet he didn't forget to bring the madam. That shows his deep love for you. Others might beg for such a blessing and never receive it. Yurtsa's cheeks flushed a faint pink, and she stayed shyly quiet. She was the concubine of court counselor Yu Renqing and had been wed to him for 3 years. Yu Renqing adored her, and so everyone in the manor treated her as if she were his legal wife. He'd taken her along for his diplomatic mission to Chun, making his deep favor of her obvious. It was a time of turmoil, and robbers ran rampant. Traveling merchants were often forced to seek the protection of the government or to hire a great number of bodyguards. When the merchants had seen an envoy of Zhou heading south, they'd all scrambled to pay him money in hopes of traveling together. Among them were many important merchants with close ties to northern Zhou's royal family, so Yu Renqing couldn't put them off. He brought them all with him, and so the procession of carriages grew. But there was the advantage of strength in numbers. They made a formidable impression as they journeyed, and, with the additional protection of skilled martial artists, no one dared to be reckless as to attack them. They had just crossed the border of Yuan province. There was still a long way to go before they'd arrive at the next provincial capital. When they finally reached a relay station, Yu Renqing ordered a half-hour rest for them to reorganize. The procession slowly rode to a stop. Some entered the station asking for hot water, while others stayed where they were, eating some rations and resting. The maid was young and thrilled at all the excitement. Yutsu couldn't leave the carriage freely, but the maid was under no such restriction. She bounded around outside before returning to Yutsu. "Madam," she said, "there's a carriage in our procession. It's located right behind the master's, but no one has left it even though there are clearly people inside. It's so strange." Yutsu was unconcerned. "Perhaps you missed them when they got out." The maid shook her head. "No, other people told me about them, and they all think it very strange. It seems that no one has seen anyone get out, nor do they know who's inside. Are they even going to the bathroom in there? Ugh, how disgusting." "Don't speak nonsense," chided Yutsu. The maid stuck out her tongue. The master should know who they are. Why not ask him, madam?" "You can ask then," said Yutsu. "I'm certainly not asking." "I overheard those merchants making bets," said the maid. "They said that the carriage is large and opulent, so maybe there is..." "Is what?" Is the master's beloved inside?" said the maid. Yutsu's expression fell a little. The maid quickly added, "It's just nonsense from outsiders. This maid thinks that's absurd. Everyone knows that Madame is the master's true beloved." At this moment, Yutsu lived a life of luxury. She was heaped with boundless favors and doting, but she knew very well that everything she had was completely dependent on Yu Renqing's fondness for her. The moment that affection faded, a fate awaited her that might very well be worse than her own maid's. So she was incredibly sensitive to the ebb and flow of Yu Renqing's affections. When she heard that he might have found someone new, panic flooded her heart. If what the maid said was true, and the carriage really held another beauty whom she'd never heard of, then that spoke multitudes to how much Yu Renqing treasured the newcomer. In that case, Yutsu would be replaced very soon. Yutsu had stayed by Yu Renqing's side for a long time, minding her place. She never pried where she shouldn't, nor pressed for more when Yu Renqing was unwilling to tell her. This was one of the reasons he adored her, but today she was unable to contain herself. After the afternoon of feeling ill at ease, when evening fell and Yu Renqing came to her carriage, Yutsu spent a while gently and carefully attending to him before trying to probe. Master, this concubine is curious which sister of hers is inside the carriage behind yours. She must be stifled silly, sitting inside all day. Why not invite her over to this concubine's carriage for some conversation? It can help dispel her boredom. For a moment, Yuren Ting looked startled. Then he laughed. All right, don't probe for answers where you shouldn't. It won't do you any good. You need not worry about this matter. Staying peacefully inside your own carriage is all you have to do. There was only the carriage wall between them and the outside, where people were coming and going. No matter how amorous Yuan Ting was feeling, he couldn't just make love to her right there. So, after satisfying himself by fondling her all over, he reluctantly returned to his own carriage. Once Yuan Ting left, the young maid peeked inside with a smile. Does the madam feel better now? Yutsu glared at her, face flushed. I trust the master must have consoled the madam already. Just who is the beauty in the other carriage? Yutsu shook her head. He didn't say, though I don't think it's a beauty. After all, I'm not the main wife. If the master truly has a new sweetheart, why hide it, as if he's afraid to tell me? Though she didn't realize it herself, the end of her sentence was tinged in sour jealousy. But I saw a servant girl leaving the carriage, said the young maid. Yutsu was stunned. What? Worried that Yutsu didn't believe her, the maid continued. It's true. The maid was outside just now. She alighted with a water skin, so she was probably leaving to fetch water. She was so pretty. All the merchants were staring at her. They didn't even blink. Could there really be a woman in there? Asked Yutsu, anxious and doubtful. Why not give me something of yours, madam? I can use it as a pretext to talk to them and take a peek. I don't think that's a good idea, said Yutsu. If the master finds out, he'll be unhappy. I'll do it secretly, so the master doesn't find out, said the maid. The madam must know who she is. That way you can come up with a solution. Otherwise, you'll still be in the dark about her identity, even when she takes your place someday. Yutsu hesitated for a moment before plucking a jade hairpin from her head and handing it to the maid. Then be careful and don't let the master find out. If you can't manage, it's fine. Please rest assured, madam. The topic of their private conversation was a common one inside the manor. That night, Yuren Ting didn't come back to Yutsu's carriage, and she and her maid were resting inside as usual. Though there were no inns to stay at along the way, the martial experts of Zhou's imperial palace were escorting them, so Yutsu was at ease. The entire journey thus far had been peacefully uneventful. Other than being stuck inside the stuffy carriage, she had little to complain about. Yutsu had been asleep into the wee hours of the night when she felt a slight chill on her face. She opened her eyes in a daze, but before she could react, her mouth was covered. Just then, someone laughed quietly in her ear. How keen you are! However, you're quite lucky. I'm in a good mood tonight, so I won't kill you. That man was even willing to save the life of a horse. If he knew I killed you, he'd definitely despise me even more. That was the last thing Yutsu heard that night, for she lost consciousness quickly after. The young maiden even took the time to tuck her mistress in before exiting the carriage. Lifting her skirts, she ran toward Yuren Ting's location in a fluster. She was stopped outside the carriage and quietly called out, Master! Master! Yuren Ting hadn't fallen asleep yet. After a moment, the curtains lifted, revealing his impatient face. What is it? The young maid looked at the martial artists guarding the carriage, then whispered, somewhat embarrassed. The madam's time of the month is almost here, so she has a hard time sleeping soundly. She just had a nightmare and she's crying. Could the master please look in on her? There was a beauty traveling with him, yet he had to sleep alone with only his bedding for company. It was truly agonizing. So when Yuren Ting heard this, a flame blazed to life in his heart. I'll go and see. The men Yuren Yong sent with him moved to follow, and he quickly cleared his throat. I'm only going to my concubine's carriage to take a look. You need not come with me. All the martial artists had keen eyes and ears. If anything started in the carriage, they'd hear everything with perfect clarity without even trying. Inevitably, it would be embarrassing for the one being overheard. The men were a bit displeased. They weren't courtyard guards who could be ordered around. Officially, they were martial artists under imperial employ, but in actuality, they were from Huanyue sect and only took orders from Yan Wushi and Yuan Yong. Normally, they'd accompany the emperor. Asking them to escort an envoy was already an insult to them. They had their own pride and halted their steps at Yuan Ting's words. When they saw him enter one of the carriages mere paces away, they gave it no further thought. Yuan Ting followed the maid into the carriage. The moment the door shut behind him, he felt that something was wrong. Yutze, why didn't you light the lamp? He tried to turn around, but it was already too late. A bone-chilling cold pierced his back, a jade hairpin held by a delicate hand. It was simply too fast. In the span of a blink, the jade hairpin's point had torn through his clothes and stabbed half an inch into his flesh. Yuan Qing's mouth fell open, and his face was seized with terror. By now, he knew he'd fallen into a trap, and he cursed his own stupidity for stopping the martial artists from following. Even though they were only a few steps away, his attacker had enough time to gore straight through to his heart. He could already see hell beckoning to him. But as the next moment rolled by, the jade hairpin advanced no further. Instead, it was withdrawn, yanked out of his body. Yuan Qing collapsed forward, landing right on top of the unconscious Yutze. There was a beauty in his arms, but he wasn't in the mood at all. He screamed for help and whipped his head back. The young maid who'd attacked him quickly retreated. In an instant, she drifted several meters away from the carriage. But there was someone even faster. A blue shadow caught up to her, and the two of them appeared to exchange strikes. The young maid groaned in pain, and her body was flung to the side. "Junior Preceptor! Save me, Junior Preceptor!" Yuan Ting was overjoyed. He was practically raring to leap onto Yan Wushi and cling to him like a limpet. But at that moment, the air split loudly around them as countless shadowy figures suddenly materialized in the darkness and pounced toward him. Yuan Ting's delight transformed into terror. Ignoring his bleeding back, he stumbled and crawled far into the carriage as the experts escorting him engaged the enemy. When they'd left, Yuan Yong had told him that Northern Tea would doubtlessly try every trick in the book to stop the Zhou-Chun alliance from happening. He'd said that Yan Wushi would head to the south with him so as to protect him during the trip. Back then, Yuan Qing had thought that the emperor was making a mountain out of a molehill. But at the same time, few people could claim they'd had the honor of letting the demon lord protect them, so it greatly satisfied Yuan Qing's vanity. He'd done as asked and concealed Yan Wushi's identity. Hence, outsiders only thought there was another beauty like Yutze in the carriage. Never had Yuan Qing thought that he'd have a brush with death right then and there. If he hadn't concealed Yan Wushi's presence, there was no way the enemy would have exposed themselves so quickly. They might have even tried more underhanded tactics, something more difficult to guard against. If his guardians could seize the opportunity and get rid of most of the attackers tonight, then the remaining journey to Chun would become a great deal safer. Yuan Qing understood this very well. But with the ring of clashing weapons outside and the scent of blood still filling his nostrils, Yuan Qing felt like he was on the verge of suffocation. Even Yan Wushi's presence couldn't calm him down completely. Then, like he'd just thought of something, he sprang up and quickly pressed his fingers beneath Yutze's nose. Only after some time did he release a sigh of relief, his entire body slumping inside the carriage. Outside, the battle continued. Yuan Qing wasn't the only one who'd been frightened. The merchants who accompanied them were all huddled fearfully inside their carriages, too afraid to leave. Several attendants had thought their martial abilities sufficient and wanted to help. Within several moments, they were lying dead on the ground. They'd been unable to withstand a single strike. The attackers were brutal, ruthless, and they boldly left their faces uncovered. Some people hadn't managed to escape in time, their lives falling to the blades straight away. 4 elders from He Huan sect surrounded Yan Wushi. Though they outnumbered him, it was those 4 who seemed to be in trouble, their circumstances dire. A mere second later, their formation was in tatters and they appeared close to defeat. Though Yan Wushi was alone and surrounded, there was something ostentatious about him, a domineering presence that said he was more than their equal. Just that alone was enough to overpower them all. On the other hand, Xiao Se sent a person flying with a palm strike, but he was unwilling to approach Yan Wushi. Instead, he tried to move toward the carriage where Yuan Ting was hiding, but he didn't forget to taunt Bai Zhong as well. Sure, Mei, you truly can't do anything right, can you? You even managed to ruin a trivial task. How will Shi Tzuan entrust you with any missions ever again? Bai Zhong was sitting in a tree on the sidelines. Arms crossed, she laughed. Xiao Shushong never told me that sect leader Yan was here too. If you're so capable, why don't you confront him properly yourself? Xiao Se gave a contemptuous snort, but didn't answer. He sent a blast from his palm at the carriage, rupturing it on the spot and revealing Yuan Ting's terrified face. However, he was quickly frustrated as more fighters arrived. Shi Tzuan asked us to assassinate one man, not show off and pick fights, he yelled at Bai Zhong. Hurry up and help me while the elders are stalling Yan Wushi. The escorting experts weren't a match for Xiao Se, but their superior numbers meant he couldn't just ignore them. Between 2 parties of roughly equal abilities, one's martial superiority didn't lie in flashy moves or internal cultivation, but rather their experience and technique. Every time Xiao Se defeated one combatant, another one emerged. Unable to take it any longer, his annoyance gave way to irascibility. Yet Bai Zhong was unmoved. We talked about this before coming here. The sect leader only told me to watch for a chance to assassinate Yuan Ting. It took me everything to escape from sect leader Yan. My chest still hurts. How could I possibly manage to help Xiao Shushong in his fight? Xiao Se clenched his teeth in a fury while paying his respects to all 18 generations of Bai Zhong's ancestors along with her master, Sang Jingxing. But for now, there were people in his way, so he couldn't spare the time to kill Yuan Ting. Xiao Se caught sight of Yuan Ting dragging a beauty toward another carriage, her status unknown. Flames of rage burned hotter in his heart. He couldn't take it anymore. Xiao Se used his full strength, quickly finishing off his enemies before charging after Yuan Ting. Yuan Ting had already hidden himself in the carriage by then, but Xiao Se laughed coldly, thinking this man terribly stupid. Did he believe the carriage was wrought of indestructible iron? It would have been better to run off into the forest. Thinking this, he did the same as before and sent a palm strike at the carriage. But this time, his attack was stopped entirely. Or more precisely, a mighty surge of true qi flooded toward him, forcing him to retreat. The blast of true qi blew the doors of the carriage open, revealing a pale, beautiful face. All right, everyone, that concludes the reading of chapters 35 through 37 of Thousand Autumns, Volume 2, also known as Qianqiu. I have to say, one of the things I am loving is that as the plot picks up, we are getting more and more fights that are happening, whether they involve Shen Qiao or not, which we all know they involve Shen Qiao, right? Because the man just cannot catch a break. Also, yes, we have officially said goodbye to what I am proclaiming the oiled up bamboo cane since he got his sword Shanhe Tongbei back, which I'm very happy that he was reunited with his baby. So anyway, that is all for today. I hope you all have a wonderful day or night, and I'll see you next time for the reading of chapters 38 through 40. Bye-bye.